Hello everyone, this is Christian and you are welcome back to the Don't Have channel. Today we will be diving into one of the most important concepts in Node.js, which is synchronous and asynchronous programming. So imagine this, you are at a coffee shop and instead of waiting for every single order, you get your coffee whilst others are still being made behind the scenes. That is the magic of asynchronous in action. In this video, I will break it down what it means for a code to run one step at a time, which is synchronous, versus multitasking magic, which is asynchronous. That makes Node.js shine. Stick around and by the end of this video, you will know exactly how to speed up your code and make it more efficient. Let's dive into it. Alright, so like how I did it previously, I have my notes here and then I have my index where we'll be executing our codes, and then I have a file here, right, which is a node.md file which contains our string which we will be reading. Okay, so let's first start with synchronous programming. What synchronous programming basically means is the code runs from top to down, okay, and it runs one step at a time. Okay, so let's first copy this code to our index.js. Okay, yeah, so this code is synchronous, and what I mean is the first code is going to execute, right, or the first line of the code is going to execute. Once it's done, it moves to the next one. Okay, so it's sequential until it finishes the previous one. It doesn't move to the next one. Okay, that is basically what synchronous programming is all about. So I'm just going to open my terminal, and before that, let me save this file. Okay, so now if you execute this code, what we expect is that it imports the file system. Okay, read whatever is inside the node.emd file, okay, which is this one, and then now logs, or it now console logs the file contents right here. Okay, and then you move on to console log this message, right, and we say this will only log after the file is read. Okay, so that is basically what this code is supposed to do. I'm just going to type in node index.js and then press enter. Sorry, let me try and zoom this so that zoom in a little bit, okay, so that you can see it well. So as you can see down here, we have our file content be console log here, and then now we have this only logs, or this only logs after the file is being read. Okay, so that is basically what synchronous programming is all about. The code runs one at a time. So the first one runs, then it moves on to the next one. This one also runs and then move on in that order. Okay, now the next one, which is the most important so far as Node.js is concerned, is asynchronous programming. Okay, so what asynchronous programming basically means is it makes us do multitasking. Okay, so whilst reading the file from the file, or whilst making a request or making an API request to a server at a different endpoint, you can still execute other tasks, right, whilst waiting for it. Okay, so mind you, this could be a different thing rather than just reading from a file. Okay, this could be maybe making a request from a server somewhere and might take some time. Okay, and you would like to maybe execute the code below whilst this one is in process. Okay, so that's when asynchronous comes into play. So here I just wrote some few notes here, which is asynchronous programming. The task can be executed without blocking the flow of the program. Okay, and instead of waiting for one task to finish before starting the next one, asynchronous code allows the program to execute or to continue executing whilst waiting for operation like file reading, HTTP request to complete. Okay, so that's what I basically explained earlier on. So now let's try this code. Okay, it's the same concept. We are reading from a file, right? But now we are using the asynchronous method, right? And as you can see previously, we had to first print out the concept or the content of the file before we move on to the next console log, right? By asynchronous programming, we expect this to log before we get the content of the file, right? Because this takes some seconds, right? So instead of waiting for this to finish, we just move on to execute different tasks, and once it's ready, we come back and then we console log this, right? I hope I'm pretty clear on this. So that is basically the whole idea about synchronous and asynchronous. So let's save this file, and again I'm just going to type in node index.js and let's run this file. Boom. And as you can see here, we are having this will log before the file is being read, right? And that is basically what's happening. But when you look at the code, when you're reading it from top to down, ideally we're supposed to get the console log, or we are supposed to console log the content of the file before it gets to this. But when we executed it, or when we run the code, we got this one first, right? Which is this one, before we got the content of the file, which means asynchronous is being taken in place, right? Or this code is being run asynchronously. So that is the basic concept about these two. We have some techniques which we use to execute that, or to perform or handle asynchronous programming. And I'm sure now you are familiar with these. We have callbacks, we have promises, and then we have async await, right? And I think we dive deeper into these techniques in our previous video, which we dealt with handling of errors, right? So I'm just going to brush through and then quickly remove. So basic the callback, we learned previously is we have a method or whatever task we want to perform, and then we have a function that is being called after the task is being performed, right? So here we are reading a file, and once the file is being read, we call this callback function. Okay, and then we have our console log here. So I'm just going to copy this again to our index.js, right? And then as you can see, let's save this and then run it. So ideally we are supposed to get this before the content of the file, right? So I'm going to run this, and as you can see, we are getting that, which is our console log here, and then after that we console log the content of the file, right? So we are using asynchronous with callbacks. Okay, so now let's move on to the next one, promises. So let me refresh your mind. Promises, we dealt with dot then and then catch. So the then is used to get the result, and then dot catch is used to get the reject, right? So I'm just going to copy this one as well, go back here, then paste it right here. Okay, so as you can see, again we are reading it from top to down. We are supposed to read a file and then get the content, and then we move on here, and then that's right. But with asynchronous, we are going to get this one before you even get the file, the content of the file. So let's run that one. Oops, we're getting an error, right? Let's try and resolve this error. So what are they saying? Okay, yeah, so my bad. So we are it's supposed to be a promise, right? So that's why we are getting this error. Sorry. So I'm just going to clear my console, okay, and then now we are supposed to execute it again, right? So remind you, when we're dealing with promises, I told you, yeah, so I didn't copy this one, right? So when we're dealing with promises, I told you to use the promise, that is the dot then and then the catch on a method. That method or that function is supposed to be a promise, right? Yeah, so if you don't bring the promise and you use just the normal file system function, it's going to throw an error, right? And that is what we witnessed. So if you go back again, as you can see, you're having the error. But once you bring the promise right here, and then you run it again, you don't get the error, right? So, and as you can see, once again, we are getting this log before the file is being read, right? And then after that, we get the console or the content of the file, right? So this is another way of handling asynchronous programming in Node.js. And then the last but not the least is the async await, okay? And we spoke about it earlier on. So I'm just going to copy that implementation as well. So I'm just going to copy this, then bring it here, right? And then now what we are basically doing is we set up our method or a function, which is async function, right? And then inside here we are reading our file, and then we stated here it's an await, and so we wait for the data and then we console log the data here, right? And then we call the function, the whole function here, which is the async function here, and then we console log this. So ideally, if you are reading it, this is how it's supposed to be. We call this function here, so it comes inside this function, execute whatever is inside it, then it move on to the next line, right? But since we are using async await, asynchronous programming is going to be handled. So we are going to get this console log first before the content of the file or the content of this file here, right? So now let's try that one as well. So I'm just going to type in node index.js and then run it, and as you can see, this logs before the file is read, and then we have the content of the file right here. So this is basically how you handle, or how you can handle, asynchronous programming, right? And actually our next video was supposed to be on file system, right? But I think our previous video and this video we've dealt with how we can handle files, right? Which is read from files and all that. So in our next video, I'm not going to spend much time on reading and writing into files, right? But we are going to do a hands or a simple project on setting up our Node.js server, and then from there we will actually try and then create data into files and then read from the files. And from there you actually get to understand how file system actually works. Okay, I hope this is understood, right? So in this video we've been able to look at how we handle, or we now have a general idea about asynchronous and synchronous programming, and we've been able to tackle some of the techniques in implementing that, right? And in our next video we are going to actually set up our Node.js server, and I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you did, kindly click on the subscribe button, like this video, share with friends, and see you in the next one. Happy coding.